Thanks a lot for coming. Vivian Walsh. I am based in Paris and work for Time magazine. We have here 3 journalists who've spent much of the past 18 months investigating war crimes in Ukraine. Masha Froliak from the New York Times, from the investigative team that delved into the Bucha killings. She will go into more in-depth from what you heard in the immediately previous panel. And Anna Mironyuk, who's head of investigations for the Kyiv Independent, will be looking at 2 investigations that they've done. One concerning the abuse of power within the Ukrainian military's International Legion, and the other concerning the abduction of kids by the Russian military. And finally, Valeria Yugoshina, who is an investigative reporter with the Schemes project of Radio Liberty, the Ukrainian service, who'll be looking at the events in Izyum and how they pieced together what had actually happened there. So in that order, I'd like to invite Masha up.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending the panel. My name is Masha Froliak. I've been covering the war in Ukraine together with my incredible colleague, Yusra Al-Hulu, who just presented at an earlier panel. We worked on, today I'll talk about our investigation into likely war crimes in Bucha, and I'll go over the sort of process and methodology that we used in this work. I'll go over some general steps, and then if you have any specific, more detailed questions about any of the pieces of evidence, you can probably ask during the Q&A. Also a little warning that some of the imagery is going to be graphic. So as you know, probably know, Bucha is a small town in Kyiv region, and it was under occupation for about a month in March. While Russian forces were in control of the town, there was very little information. There was pretty much informational blackout. So when Bucha was liberated and first images started coming out, documented by Ukrainian law enforcement and press reporters, photographers, there was a sense of shock, bodies laying on the streets for weeks, some with their hands tied behind their backs. So this is just a satellite imagery of the stretch of Yablonska with the bodies. Russian authorities immediately said that Russian soldiers had nothing to do with this, with the killings of the civilians, and that these images were a hoax. Sergei Lavrov said, well, where is the list of victims, suggesting that their deaths were not real. It was evident to us right away that Bucha was a crime scene, and so we set out to identify victims documented by photographers during a stretch on one street in Bucha, Yablonska Street. So we set out to identify who were the victims, what happened to them, and who is responsible. I'll go over quickly some of the challenges we had. As Yusra and I entered Bucha right after its liberation, it became evident that there was no electricity in town, and it went out in most parts of the town within days of Russian occupation. So what that meant is that there isn't going to be, it's unlikely we'll have CCTV, phones of locals who might have documented something, likely the phones will be out of charge. And plus it was dangerous for locals to document anything because Russian soldiers were killing people for such acts. Another challenge we had is that there were so many bodies and that had to be registered, picked up, taken to morgues, that Ukrainian law enforcement was overwhelmed, and volunteers would try to help, and they would remove the bodies. So what this meant that we didn't have a list of victims on Jablinska Street. So all we had were photos documented by photographers from the crime scenes. So in our methodology was basically to combine field reporting, being on the ground, looking for sources, knocking on doors with OSINT techniques, analyzing visual evidence, and troves of data that we obtained. As Russian forces withdrew, they left behind a lot of personal and military artifacts. So Yusra and I spent many of the early days simply photographing everything we could find, hoping that this information will give us some clues in our investigation. For instance, crates with weapons, slips containing military units. Sometimes we would find lists of soldiers in these crates. Russian soldiers left patches behind. We found military documents that were left behind. Also, Russian soldiers stayed in people's households, and they would leave their personal belongings like letters and uniforms. So we were documenting all of it, and Yusra was pinpointing all the locations where we would find things on the map. So we started collecting CCTV footage that luckily still existed in some critical locations, and also drone footage that we obtained from different military units that were operating during the time. And along with our team in New York, we started analyzing this data, which in the end we had about 23 terabytes. There were cameras right in front of the building that was turned into a Russian military base. Even though Russian soldiers tried to destroy these cameras, some of them continued working and documented a moment that became symbolic to their crimes. They led a group of men to their execution. During our reporting, we found a witness who filmed through the window of his house how these men were led to the courtyard of the military base. And you can see in this footage a man in a blue sweatshirt who is one of the victims. We also, in our analysis, we found drone footage that flew over that site shortly after, and you can already see victims laying lifeless, and you can see that there is a person in a blue sweatshirt there. This is an image from the actual crime scene. In order to identify the bodies, we looked through thousands of morgue photos that were published in a Telegram group by the police. Sometimes these photos would contain a name of the victim because if, let's say, a victim had a passport or an ID on them, this was done by the police so that relatives could find their missing family members faster. The way it helped us is we could try to match details from the clothing, from these crime scene images that we had with these morgue photos. And actually this way we found a number of victims. We also sifted through social media groups for missing persons and reached out to many people locally. In general, it was very important for us to identify all of the victims and to also identify the time when each victim was killed and when their bodies would appear on Jablinska Street. So we used time-stamped satellite imagery and drone footage. In some instances, we were lucky to find witnesses whose data also was crucial for us. In this case, a local whose house was on Jablonska Street was documenting from the attic of his house how bodies were appearing on the streets. This is one of the photos. So these timestamps were very important for us. We analyzed thousands of hours of footage. We were looking at movements of the Russian military vehicles and also at the numbers and identifying markings on these vehicles. Most of the times they were painted over, but in some cases we spotted visible markings and numbers. And so what we did then is to try to understand what military unit this is. We matched these numbers with videos from military trainings in Belarus right before the invasion in February. And there were matches there, and we also looked through Russian news coverage. And we identified the markings belonging to 234th Regiment of the 76th Division. In some instances, the cameras actually captured the moment of crime. So in this case, you see different angles of the moment when Russian military vehicle shoots at a car of a civilian. His name was Volodymyr Ruchkovsky. At that moment, he was trying to evacuate with his partner Yelena, who survived. He was killed. In general, our goal was to understand what military unit was present on the street when the bodies when people were killed. So here, red dots signify victims, and green dots, evidence that we were finding of the military unit. Another crucial evidence I'll walk through is phone calls that Russian soldiers made. During our reporting with USER, we spoke to a lot of locals and we documented their testimonies, and a lot of people told us that Russian soldiers destroyed their phones or took their phones. And so we decided to check, well, is it possible that Russian soldiers would actually use use phones to make calls home? And could they have used the phones of the victims? So we found from the families, we found the numbers for each victim. And then we obtained a call log of all the calls made in the region during the month of the occupation. And we saw that Russian soldiers used the phones of 6 victims. So now we had the outgoing Russian numbers. And so we needed to find who the soldiers are making these calls. So it was a multi-step process, but basically we first found social media profiles linked to the Russian numbers, to the outgoing Russian numbers. And then we looked in these social media profiles for men of military age. We also made calls to these outgoing Russian numbers, and we spoke to the family members of the soldiers, and we confirmed their names and military unit. So you can see, and then we identified the soldiers, we scraped their social media profiles as well. In the instance of one of the victims at this juncture on Jablonska Street, Maxim Kireev, we found that Russian soldiers used his phone hours after he was killed. We identified 8 men from 234th Regiment using his phone. 3 of the same soldiers used the phone of another victim just a week earlier. In general, our analysis showed that 22 soldiers used the phones of the victims killed along Jablonska Street on different days in March. Another evidence I'll quickly go through is because we obtained a lot of military documents that were retrieved in Bucha by the Ukrainian law officials or law enforcement officials or Ukrainian locals. One of the documents contains call signs of the commanders of the 76th Division and their communications networks, radio networks. So here you see the top commanders' call signs. One of the cameras that was in front of the Russian military base actually had audio, and we transcribed the audio, and what we saw is that Russian soldiers were communicating on the radio and using some of these call signs of the top commanders, including the regiment commander of the 234th Regiment, Artyom Gorodilov. So all the evidence that we found links 234th Regiment and its leadership to the crimes committed on Yablonska Street. It took us 8 months to analyze all the data and to identify 36 victims. We published their names and their photos. We looked through death certificates provided by the family members, and we saw that the predominant reason for their deaths were gun wounds or severe burns to their bodies. Most of these people were civilians, and they died while they were trying to go check in on their relatives or get groceries or trying to evacuate. Thank you. If you have any specific questions about any of the pieces of evidence, more detailed, you can ask after all the panels or sessions.
Just to tell you, and I'll hand over to you.
Hello, my name is Anna Mironjuk. I'm the head of investigations at the Kyiv Independent, and the Kyiv Independent is an English language media outlet based in Kyiv, Ukraine. And since the very start of its creation in November 2021, it has envisioned itself as a media publication that is dedicated to investigations, and thus we have two investigative desks. One fully dedicated, focusing on investigating Russian war crimes, and another one exposing corruption and abuses of power in Ukraine. I'll start with the story that my investigative unit did. It was first published in August, and then we published the follow-up in November. This story exposed leadership misconduct of the commanders in the International Legion, which is a military formation within the Ukrainian armed forces, which is supervised by both Ukrainian armed forces and international military intelligence. So myself and a colleague of mine, Alexander Khrebet, we found evidence that implicated leadership of this unit of abuse of power, theft, and sending soldiers on reckless military operations that they referred to as suicide missions, as well as theft of light weapons, including Western-provided arms, and personal belongings of soldiers, meaning some equipment that they either bought for themselves or received from volunteers. We also found evidence that one of the perpetrators was a convicted criminal, convicted on around 70 charges in his home country, Poland, who is also a former member of an organized crime group. So we found this person, Piotr Kapuscinski, hiding under another name in the leadership of the International Legion and mismanaging basically the Legion there. We also found testimonies of the soldiers who spoke about the fact that any attempt of flagging these abuses would lead to their dismissal from the International Legion. So how we did the story. First, we received a tip from a source who approached us saying that there is a Polish mobster in the leadership of the International Legion committing various misdeeds. We started first just trying to check his background. And also remember that we didn't know his real name at first. It was tricky, so he was hiding under another name, Sasha Kuczynski, while his real name is Piotr Kapuscinski. Not as far away, but still a different name. So we started from checking the records on the Polish wanted person registry, and we found him there. So he was on a wanted list. Then we checked Ukraine's and Polish court records, registers, and found records of his previous of the previous investigations into him and his charges. We also researched through articles published in the Polish media and found quite a lot in his previous actions involving his activities within the organized crime group which he was part of. We also then started developing the network of sources, trying to see whether we could find proofs of the misdeeds that he's committing within the Legion. And that's how we started talking to many legionnaires, as well as volunteers, collecting testimonies from them. When we found witnesses, they started not only providing us with their oral testimonies, they also provided us with documents, because before our first source came to us, this tip came to us, the soldiers for a couple months have been trying to attract attention to the issue, and they filed reports to the President's Office of Ukraine, as well as Parliament. They put together a 78-page document which laid out all the problems within the Legion and filed it to the Parliament. However, since it didn't yield results, they approached us journalists. So we collected all these materials, all the documents that they put together, their emails to their embassies, and all the materials that we could have, videos, photos, and then we cross-verified leads, edited the story, fact-check, legal check, the story's out. Once again, on sources we used, so out of human sources, we had legionnaires, we also had volunteers, we had former members of the Legion who were either kicked out for speaking up, or trying to speak up, or who left the Legion because they couldn't find their place there and didn't want to continue. So we also spoke to official sources of the record and arms experts, as well as law enforcement in Ukraine and in Poland. Altogether, we had at least 30 sources, meaning legionnaire sources, and out of all the legionnaires, only one spoke on the record. The rest fed retribution and really didn't want to deal with the with these commanders. They were scared of being either kicked out of the Legion or actually of physical threats. Other sources that we had were the leaked documents that I've mentioned, emails, screenshots, videos. We obtained a video where this Polish commander was featured. Where there was a scene where the commander asked soldiers to loot the supermarket. And the soldiers featured there on this video, they refused. Somebody of the soldiers recorded this incident as they are refusing to obey the command because they found it as an illegal order. So we obtained this video among other videos and photographs that proved our hypothesis. We also used PMIs to verify. To actually prove that this commander is in fact the person who is on the wanted list of Polish police, because we had some photographs from sources of this commander. And we also, of course, researched news articles all across Ukrainian and Polish media. So we had a breakthrough. It was after we published the first part of the story in August. The strategy was as follows. We go with what we have so far, and if hoping that other legionnaires who could relate to the story could then have trust in us because we didn't reveal our sources, we protected our sources, and then speak up. And that approach worked. Immediately after we released the first part of the story, many soldiers and their relatives started approaching myself and my colleague, offering their expertise, their knowledge on the issues, and that's how we were able to expand our network of sources, collective in more standing data, and prove even further misdeeds like stealing of light weapons. We worked as a team of two. We cooperated and coordinated either in person or on Signal, and we also had some system in place where we, since we had quite a few data set, we had vast data, and it was just two of us, so we had a system in place where we would write down all the highlights of every interview we would have, even if this interview seemed irrelevant, and then we would have highlights for every single document we have. Actually, for every single piece of evidence, we would have highlights, and then it made it easier for us to cross-verify leads. Challenges we faced were first, sources were claiming that they face severe risks for speaking to us. Then there was a big challenge of inner fighting. It appears that our sources didn't necessarily like one another, and there were a few groups within the International Legion, and they were fighting between themselves. So it really complicated things for us because every source was relevant for us and important. So we tried to find a way of not getting dragged into inner fights and just focused on the story. Also, there was a big risk of public backlash because at the time when we were publishing the story in August last year, we were among the first media outlets which published something critical of Ukrainian military, and thus it created a room for backlash. And of course, there was the biggest risk, I would say, was a criminal investigation that could have been started against us because we there were rules in place because of the martial law, which don't allow you to reveal some information in Ukraine at the moment because of the Russian invasion. So we had to run the story through a legal check and to make sure that there is no criminal investigation into the team that did it. And yeah, so how we dealt with our own security. First, when we were releasing the first story, we didn't really take it into account, I guess. But then the second time, when we released the November story, our team had to relocate for some time. So advice on for those who are jumping on the similar project, run thorough background checks on sources and understand the motives of people you're speaking to, question everything, and give up on leads that don't prove. Yeah, so this story attracted quite a lot of attention and made headlines, but unfortunately it hasn't brought justice. The people in question are still serving in the Legion. Another story that I want to highlight is by my colleagues from the War Crime Investigations Unit within the Kyiv Independent. This story looked into the abduction of Ukrainian children by Russians. So how this story evolved. The colleagues of mine, they received a leaked document listing names of the Ukrainian children that were abducted from the city of Mariupol in the east of Ukraine and through Donetsk were taken to Russia. They started identifying these children on the list, locating them in Russia and finding their Ukrainian legal guardians. Since Ukrainian authorities didn't want to collaborate because of the privacy issues on, the relatives of the children, parents, etc., they started searching them themselves, applying OSINT tools. So the sources used in this story, human sources, were volunteers, proved very helpful because they had information on the abducted children, and they helped to bring these children back from Russia to Ukraine. Human rights defenders, abducted children who made it back to Ukraine. parents and legal guardians, Ukrainian officials, and eyewitnesses, of course. There was this first document listing 31 name of the children. Then, of course, they applied facial recognition tools and reverse imagery search, social media search, VK, OK, Odnoklassniki, Telegram proved effective to Russian news sites, as well as involving Russian propaganda media. For example, Russian propaganda authorities would often post some video or a picture featuring an abducted child, and that's what my colleagues used for their research too. And of course, Ukrainian court records, since Ukrainian authorities didn't help in understanding whether these children had parents or other legal guardians, that was something that they referred to as well. So the breakthrough was the interview with two orphaned children from Mariupol, who Russian proxies forcibly moved to temporarily occupied Donetsk, and were about to take them to Russia, which didn't happen. And these kids, these two boys, they identified other children from the list that my colleagues received, and they also helped, they also named a Russian collaborator in occupied Donetsk who orchestrated the entire operation of the abduction. And that helped my colleagues to identify this person and then approach for comment. The team working on the story, two primary journalists, Olesya Bida, who is in this room. You can find her after this session if you like to ask some questions on this investigation. Also, researcher Konstantin, and they worked together, also having a system in place, spreadsheets where they collected all the data that they found, and that helped to have everything in order. Challenges they faced the greatest challenge was actually the security of the children. So my colleagues had to give up on some information that they would otherwise reveal and expose and publish, but due to the safety of the children that was placed first, they didn't, in order for these children to be able to return back to Ukraine. And advice is identify, basically name these people who are behind that. It's not only Russian President Vladimir Putin or Children's Commissioner Maria Lvova-Belova. There are many more people on there who are involved, in Donetsk especially, so they all should be named, and that's the emphasis. Also, another tip, narrow down your research to a specific area, because there are different schemes, so to say, or different routes that these children can go through. So in order to learn how it works in a very specific case, stick to one geographical area, which will help you understand how it works there precisely. And also stay cautious, because sometimes these foster families, so to say, of these abducted children, they could mislead you, and they can text you back on behalf of the child you are trying to approach. So stay cautious with that as well. Thank you.
Valeria. Okay, so my name is Valerie. I work in a project called Schemes. It's founded by Ukrainian Service of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. And we were established after Revolution of Dignity in 2014 as a weekly-based TV program about high-level corruption. Since a full-scale invasion, I personally turned to war crimes investigations, and I would try to tell you stories about two investigations. I would try my best to be fast. But the problem is that I totally forgot English this morning. That's why I would show you the short video. You promised me that it would be voice. Okay, we have subtitles. Enjoy.
Okay, I would stop it because I'm also bored to see it without voice. So, after the part of Kharkiv region liberation, me and my colleague, so I'm working as an author, but in two of these investigations, I worked with my editor, Kira. She's at this room. Kira is a great editor and also our cameraman for these stories. So yeah, we just went to Kharkiv region and we just don't know what to do because we went there right after a Ukrainian counteroffensive. So we found ourselves at Izyum forest. I believe that you all read it, saw it in news. What we had, we just went there and there was a place of mass burial. We knew everything, not like everything, we knew that it's about 400 people there buried. And it was all in the news. What should we do as investigative journalists? So we were just brainstorming together, sitting in the forest and trying to reach out what should we do. And we decided that we have a few questions, maybe who is laying there, why these people died, and so on. And of course, who is responsible for their deaths. What should we do? It was our next thought. So maybe law enforcement bodies can know the answer, but it was too early, and actually they didn't. So it's like a little spoiler. Then maybe we thought that maybe some representative of occupation forces should know, but thanks God they are now in Russia or laying somewhere. We tried to look at this forest, at these mass graves from the satellite, but still it is forest and you just can't see anything. And then we decided to find who was burying these people. So these 5 people, we call them diggers, because part of them it was their work. They just worked in such a bureau, and part of them was volunteers who was digging in the ground. So we collect their testimonies. There were 5 of them, so it was kind of double checking the information because we had these cross interviews. But then we decided that we can also fact check their testimonies because a few of them, they were hiding some cell phones, and we discovered that they took a portrait of each body before putting it in the ground. So we had their witnesses, we had photos, portraits of dead people, and they also had like written text in some notebook with possible names. If they found some documents with the body, they collected into this notebook. And as it turned out, no one, and even the law forces, they just didn't collect it in one system. So it was existing like separately. Those diggers, this notebook, and these photos. That's why we just become first who did it. I personally downloaded photos of 400 bodies at my notebook, took a photo of this notebook, and then we just put these diggers into our editorial car, and we were driving through the old streets of Izyum, and I was asking them, maybe you know this place, maybe you know this courtyard, maybe you can remember something, because of course they were totally at the affect situation. And when some of them said that, oh, okay, I can remember this courtyard, we were trying just to look at person's photos, and then he said something like, okay, I can realize this body. And that's how we created a whole system, and that's how we identified few persons who were unnamed, who were laying at this forest. Then we decide to look how we can check who is responsible of their death. So my key point, okay, you're now free. Key points of my presentation that it's always necessary to work on the ground, because we were like driving in Izyum and looking for something that we don't know actually. But still, we collected all these little papers that were just laying under somebody's arm or in dirty and something, we just collect them. And that's how we created the most complete list of Russian military units who were operating in Izyum during the occupation. But obviously, we cannot blame all of these people. That's why we were digging through our sources, I mean law enforcement bodies, if they could know something about it. Oh, I'm just saying at my presentation, and after this material, I'm really weird with word digging. The point is that in Ukraine there's a list of law enforcement bodies which do phone interception, but there is no system there. That's why we were asking and asking and asking something about Izyum. And then we found few interceptions. We were just listening, listening, and then we found something interesting. It was a Russian soldier. We identified him, and he said something like that our commander of battalion was very cruel to civil population. He killed one woman and one man, old man. So we identified the soldier, searched for his brigade, then identified the commander, then call him, call to even to Russian law enforcement bodies. Then we present this material, and it was unexpected, but it became kind of popular in Russia. That's why Russian journalists reprinted this story, and after it, soldiers of this brigade, they start to call to some editorial boards and say, yeah, our commander was very cruel to civil population. And going to the next story, so it would be quite similar, because we just went to another Kharkiv region city called Balakliya, spoke to witnesses. You can see these two men. They were tortured. But we spoke to them, and they said that they were tortured, but they just can't name us anything about who did it, because or people were in masks, or they just don't name themselves, obviously. That's why we just left. We spoke to these persons, and then we left, because at first we decided that there is nothing to investigate there. But as I already said, I believe that investigating war crime in Ukraine is in very close connection with working in the field. That's why we turned back to Balakliya a few times, and we were looking for some evidence, some documents, some info. Actually, we just don't know what we were looking for, but we still tried at places like this. And we received a copy of a flash drive who belongs to one of the kind of commanders. It's a person inside the battalion who is responsible for propaganda inside the Russian military unit. And we found this copy of the flash drives, which were lost in Balakliya. And we were trying to double check the authenticity of this flash drive. That's why we found one name in there. It was a person who was responsible for secretness. And he received, according to information from this flash drive, he received an award for good collecting secret documents. So we identified him, then we called him. And his wife said that it is true. He received an award, and also just by chance we triple checked the authenticity of this flash drive, because here is the document. So here is the document. It's not signed because it's from the flash drive, and here is the document that we just found somewhere in dirt. And for some reason, I just remembered about this surname. And that's how we compare it, and we decided that this flash drive is quite authentical and we could work with it. So we read everything. It was really hard because it was, I don't know, thousands documents. We were just reading them, I don't know, maybe a few months. And then we found there some persons who received Medal of Honor from Russian government for so-called work with civil population. That's why we decided to check what do they call work with civil population, and we can read from there that they were proud that they arrest like 12 so-called helpers to Ukrainian military. That's why we identified few of persons who received such an award, and one of them was this man. It was the first identified FSB officer of Russia, because he was kind of important because he was he was putting his signature under these award lists of like regular soldiers. So we decided to identify him, but it was kind of problematic because we know only his first letter of name and surname. And Russia is super huge country. That's why we found person who can be him. Like I don't actually remember, but it was 300 or 400 of people. And I'm not very cool with data investigative journalism. That's why we just were manually checking every suitable candidate. Then we were Googling them, and then. Actually, I will speak it publicly, like in the first time, then I was just guessing. And we aired this material. And guess what? After the publication of this material, some Balakliya citizens, they started to call to General Prosecutor's Office and said that we watched some Schemes episode, and they showed an FSB officer who were torturing me. That's how we fact-checked this material after its release. Thank you.